Did love ever break kingdoms, shatter lives, and defy every rule in a world ruled by God and kings? Between the years 500 and 1500 AD, behind towering castle walls and within silent monasteries, did forbidden desires truly ignite fires that could not be extinguished. Prepare to uncover stories of passion, betrayal, and power that shook the very foundations of medieval society. Number 7. Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn. The year was 1525, and England's King Henry VIII, a monarch famed for his athletic prowess and intellectual curiosity, found himself in a predicament. His marriage to Catherine of Aragon, daughter of the powerful Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, had endured for 16 years. They had shared moments of genuine affection and intellectual companionship. Catherine was a woman of immense dignity, piety, and intelligence, having been Queen of England since 1509. Despite her unwavering devotion and several pregnancies, only one child, Princess Mary, survived infancy. Pressing issue of a male heir, crucial for the Tudor dynasty's fragile hold on the throne, loomed large over the royal couple. Henry, once a fervent Catholic and defender of the faith, began to question the legitimacy of his marriage. Catherine had initially been married to Henry's elder brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, who died young. Church law, specifically a passage in Leviticus, stated that a man should not marry his brother's wife. Papal dispensation had allowed Henry and Catherine to marry, but now, fueled by his desire for a son and perhaps a growing sense of unease, Henry convinced himself that the marriage was cursed in God's eyes. It was into this atmosphere of dynastic anxiety that Anne Boleyn arrived at court. A young, vivacious woman with dark, sparkling eyes and an undeniable wit, Anne had spent years in the cultured courts of France before returning to England in the early 1520s. She quickly became a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine, a position that brought her into close proximity with the king. Her sister, Mary Boleyn, had already been one of Henry's mistresses. But Anne was different. She possessed a sharp mind, an independent spirit, and a captivating charm that quickly caught the king's eye. Henry, a man accustomed to having his desires met, began to pursue Anne with increasing fervor. Anne, however, refused to become merely another royal mistress. She had witnessed the fate of her sister and likely understood that such a liaison offered little security or status. She insisted on marriage, a demand that stunned the king, but also intensified his obsession. This unwavering stance transformed what might have been a fleeting affair into a seismic struggle for the throne and the future of England. Henry, infatuated and convinced that Anne would bear him the son he desperately craved, now saw his marriage to Catherine as an insurmountable obstacle. The desire for Anne, intertwined with the desperate need for a male heir, propelled him towards an unprecedented course of action: a royal annulment. The legal battle that followed was protracted and agonizing for all involved. Henry's chief minister, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, tirelessly worked to secure the annulment from Rome, but Pope Clement VII, held captive by Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, was in an impossible position. To grant the annulment would be to offend a powerful sovereign and admit papal error in granting the original dispensation. To refuse would be to risk England's allegiance. Catherine, meanwhile, remained resolute. She maintained that her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, making her marriage to Henry valid in the eyes of God and the Church. She fought with unwavering dignity and strength, refusing to be set aside, asserting her rights as queen and the mother of the legitimate heir, Princess Mary. She appealed directly to the Pope and garnered widespread public sympathy for her plight. As the years dragged on, Henry's impatience grew. He dismissed Wolsey, who failed to secure the annulment, and turned to new advisors, among them Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer, who suggested a radical solution: declare the king, not the pope, the supreme head of the church in England. This revolutionary idea would allow Henry to obtain his annulment within England without Rome's approval. In 1533, secretly married to Anne Boleyn, who was by then pregnant, Henry had Cranmer, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, declare his marriage to Catherine invalid and his marriage to Anne valid. Catherine was stripped of her title as Queen and instead referred to as the Dowager Princess of Wales, a cruel reminder of her first brief marriage. Catherine was banished from court and sent to live in various remote residences, separated from her daughter, Mary. She continued to assert her rights as queen until her death in January 1536. Her steadfast refusal to concede the annulment meant that in her eyes and the eyes of many European powers, she remained Henry's true wife until her last breath. Her life, once marked by royal splendor and political influence, ended in quiet isolation, a testament to her unyielding resolve in the face of a king's overwhelming desire and a country's dramatic upheaval. The story of Henry, Catherine, and Anne is a stark illustration of how personal longing, dynastic imperative, and religious authority clashed with devastating consequences, forever altering the course of English history. Number 6. Edward III, Philippa of Hainaut, Alice Perrers. The long and illustrious reign of King Edward III of England, spanning from 1327 to 1377, was marked by significant military victories, especially in the early stages of the Hundred Years' War, and a flourishing of chivalry. His marriage to Philippa of Hainaut was a cornerstone of his reign, a union generally regarded as politically astute and personally affectionate. Philippa, a woman admired for her kindness, intelligence, and diplomatic skill, bore Edward numerous children, including the celebrated Edward the Black Prince, and she often acted as regent in England while the king was abroad campaigning. Their marriage was a model of royal stability, a rare commodity in medieval Europe. However, as Edward III aged, and particularly after the death of his beloved Queen Philippa in 1369, his personal life took a dramatic turn. The king, once a vibrant and active leader, became increasingly frail and perhaps susceptible to influence. It was during this period that Alice Perrers emerged as a prominent figure in his court. Alice was a lady of the Queen's chamber, meaning she had been part of Philippa's inner circle. She was described by contemporary chroniclers, though often with a degree of bias, as beautiful, ambitious, and cunning. She captured the aging king's attention and soon became his mistress, effectively filling the void left by Philippa's passing. Alice's relationship with Edward III was not merely a private affair. She quickly began to exert significant influence over the king, taking advantage of his declining health and weakening will. She was showered with lavish gifts, including lands, jewels, and rich garments, at a time when the royal treasury was strained by prolonged warfare. Her influence extended to legal matters and political appointments, allegedly using her position to secure favors and manipulate court proceedings for personal gain. Chroniclers, often hostile towards her due to her low birth and perceived avarice, recounted tales of her sitting on the king's lap in court, interfering in legal cases and exploiting royal patronage. She was even said to wear the late queen's jewels, an act that further fueled public resentment and courtly gossip. This open display of influence and the king's apparent infatuation stirred considerable discontent among the nobility and the burgeoning English Parliament. Court, once a bastion of chivalry and decorum under Philippa, was now seen by some as corrupted by Alice's machinations. The king's children, particularly his surviving sons like John of Gaunt, were deeply concerned by their father's behavior and Alice's growing power. Contrast between the revered memory of Queen Philippa and the perceived vulgarity and greed of Alice Perrers became a source of significant tension. The late queen represented stability, duty, and quiet strength, while Alice embodied what many saw as the king's weakening grasp on proper governance and morality. Culmination of this public displeasure came during the so-called Good Parliament of 1376. This parliament, driven by a wave of reformist sentiment and frustration over governmental corruption and the failing war effort, took aim at those seen as mismanaging the kingdom, including some of the king's closest advisors and, crucially, Alice Perrers. Accusations against her included various forms of corruption, such as interposing herself in lawsuits and accepting bribes. Parliament, in a bold move, demanded her banishment from court and the forfeiture of her properties. Under immense pressure, the aging King Edward III was forced to assent to these demands. Alice Perrers was indeed banished, though her resourceful nature meant that her exile was not absolute or permanent. She managed to recover some of her wealth and influence after the Parliament dissolved, demonstrating her tenacity and the king's continued, if diminished, attachment to her. Her story is a fascinating glimpse into the personal vulnerabilities of a powerful monarch, the complex dynamics of courtly life, and the potential for a mistress to wield significant, if controversial, power in an age when queens were expected to be models of virtue and domesticity. The shadow of the revered Philippa of Hainaut undoubtedly made Alice Perrers' unconventional rise even more pronounced and ultimately more perilous. Number 5. King John, Isabella of Angoulême, Hugh X of Lusignan. The early 13th century in England and France was a volatile period, marked by constant political maneuvering, territorial disputes, and the intricate web of feudal loyalties. King John, who ascended the English throne in 1199, was already a controversial figure, known for his volatile temper and his disputes with the nobility and the church. His first marriage to Isabella of Gloucester had been annulled, leaving him a powerful king in need of a new queen and the potential for a male heir. Across the English Channel, in the Duchy of Aquitaine, a key English possession in France, resided Isabella of Angoulême. She was a young woman, renowned for her beauty, described by contemporary chroniclers as more beautiful than Helen of Troy. At the age of around 12, Isabella was already betrothed to Hugh X of Lusignan, a powerful nobleman from Poitou, a region on the border of Aquitaine. The House of Lusignan was a significant feudal power, and this marriage alliance was intended to consolidate power and secure peace in the region. The marriage preparations were well underway, and the union seemed a foregone conclusion. However, King John, while traveling through Poitou in August 1200, encountered Isabella. He was captivated by her beauty and, acting with characteristic impulsiveness and disregard for established norms, decided that she should be his queen instead. Despite her existing betrothal and the significant political ramifications of such an act, John pressed his suit. He saw an opportunity to not only secure a beautiful queen, but also to diminish the influence of the powerful Lusignan family, who were often thorns in the side of English rule in Aquitaine. Without consulting the Lusignans or even informing them of his intentions, King John abducted Isabella and whisked her away to marry her. The marriage took place in Bordeaux on August 24, 1200. This audacious act was a grave insult to Hugh X of Lusignan and his family, publicly humiliating them and stripping them of a crucial alliance. It was a clear breach of feudal custom and a direct challenge to the authority of the Lusignans. For King John, it was a move of personal desire and political calculation. For Isabella, it was an abrupt and forceful change of destiny. Consequences of this dramatic abduction and marriage were immediate and far-reaching. Hugh X of Lusignan, enraged by the king's actions, appealed to John's feudal overlord, King Philip II of France, a man already eager to undermine English authority in France. Philip, seeing an opportunity to assert his suzerainty and reclaim English territories, summoned John to his court to answer the Lusignans' complaints. John, arguing that he was Duke of Aquitaine and not subject to French jurisdiction in this matter, refused to appear. This refusal was a direct challenge to Philip's authority. King Philip II, citing John's contempt of court and his unlawful seizure of Isabella, declared all of John's lands in France forfeit, a historic ruling that would have catastrophic consequences for the English crown. What began as a personal love triangle, or perhaps more accurately, a king's unilateral seizure of a bride, escalated into a full-scale war. Philip swiftly invaded Normandy and other English possessions in France. John, already unpopular with his own barons, struggled to raise an effective defense. Over the next few years, he lost vast swaths of English territory in France, including Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Touraine, earning him the lasting nickname Lackland. Isabella of Angoulême went on to bear King John several children, including the future King Henry III. Before John's death in 1216, however, her life continued to be complex. After John's death, she remarkably returned to Poitou, and in 1220 married her original betrothed, Hugh X of Lusignan. This second marriage to the man from whom she had been taken by force years earlier further complicated her legacy. The initial dramatic seizure of Isabella by King John, an act driven by royal prerogative and personal desire, ignited a chain of events that fundamentally reshaped the political map of medieval Europe and directly contributed to the decline of the Angevin Empire. Number 4. Joan of Kent, William Montagu, Thomas Holland. The mid-14th century in England was an era of chivalry, burgeoning courtly love traditions, and the early stages of the 100 Years' War. Beneath the veneer of knightly tournaments and grand ceremonies, personal lives of the nobility were often entangled in complex legal and romantic dilemmas. One such intricate web involved Joan, Countess of Kent, a woman of significant royal lineage, being the granddaughter of King Edward I and first cousin to King Edward III. Her striking beauty earned her the moniker, the Fair Maid of Kent. Joan's life was marked by romantic complications from a young age. While still a teenager, around 1340, she secretly married Thomas Holland, a relatively obscure but promising knight in service to King Edward III. This was a clandestine marriage, performed without the necessary royal consent, a serious offense for someone of Joan's standing. Such secret unions were not uncommon in medieval society, but were fraught with peril, especially for those in the higher echelons of the aristocracy, where marriages were primarily political and dynastic arrangements. However, the secret of this marriage was soon overshadowed by another development. A few years later, in 1341 or 1342, Joan found herself married again, this time to William Montagu, the Earl of Salisbury. Montagu was a much more powerful and prominent figure than Thomas Holland. It is unclear from historical records exactly how this second marriage came about. Was it a forced union, or was Joan somehow coerced into it, perhaps believing her first marriage was invalid due to its secrecy? Or did she simply move on, perhaps believing Holland was dead, or no longer interested? Whatever the circumstances, the outcome was a scandalous situation. A woman married to two men simultaneously, a clear violation of canon law and a deeply unsettling precedent for the English aristocracy. For years, Joan lived as the wife of William Montagu, bearing him children. But the secret of her first marriage to Thomas Holland simmered beneath the surface. Holland, who had been away on campaigns, returned and, learning of Joan's marriage to Montagu, declared his prior claim. He produced evidence of their secret vows and appealed to the ecclesiastical courts, which had jurisdiction over marriage cases. This initiated a protracted and very public legal battle that dragged on for several years, exposing the tangled love triangle to the full glare of courtly scrutiny and papal authority. The case was brought before papal courts, eventually reaching Pope Clement VI in Avignon. The legal proceedings involved testimonies, the examination of secret documents, and the weight of ecclesiastical law. It was a testament to the complexities of medieval marriage customs and the power of the Church in adjudicating personal disputes among the elite. William Montagu, the powerful Earl of Salisbury, found himself in an unenviable position, publicly challenged by a man who claimed his wife as his own. In 1349, after years of deliberation, the papal court finally issued its verdict. It ruled in favor of Thomas Holland, declaring that his marriage to Joan was valid and lawful, making her subsequent marriage to William Montagu null and void. This decision was a significant victory for Holland, and a public humiliation for Montagu, who was forced to relinquish his claim on Joan. The ruling also meant that any children Joan had with Montagu were considered illegitimate, though this status was often re-evaluated by the Church in cases where good faith on one party's part could be demonstrated. Joan of Kent and Thomas Holland were now officially recognized as husband and wife. They went on to have children, and their union, once clandestine and controversial, became legally recognized. Holland rose in prominence, dying in 1360. Joan, still a woman of remarkable beauty and status, would go on to marry for a third time to none other than Edward the Black Prince, the revered eldest son of King Edward III and heir to the throne. This third marriage to her first cousin further cemented her position at the highest echelons of English society, and their son would eventually become King Richard II. The intricate saga of Joan of Kent, William Montagu, and Thomas Holland serves as a compelling reminder of how personal relationships, societal norms, and the powerful arm of the Church could intersect in the medieval world, shaping lives and reputations. Number 3. Isabella of France, King Edward II, Roger Mortimer. The early 14th century in England was a period of intense political instability, marked by the struggles between King Edward II and his powerful barons. Edward II, who ascended the throne in 1307, was a monarch whose reign was defined by personal favorites, military defeats, and a profound inability to command the respect of his nobility. His marriage to Isabella of France, daughter of the formidable King Philip IV, was meant to cement an Anglo-French alliance and ensure stability. Isabella, later known as the She-Wolf of France, was initially a dutiful queen, bearing Edward several children, including the future Edward III. However, Edward II's reign was continually undermined by his strong attachments to a succession of male favorites, most notably Piers Gaveston, and later the intensely ambitious Hugh Despenser the Younger. These relationships alienated the English nobility, who resented the favorites' undue influence, their accumulation of wealth, and their perceived arrogance. Queen Isabella, too, found herself increasingly mortalized and disrespected by the king's devotion to these men. Despenser, in particular, sought to undermine Isabella's position, even trying to usurp her lands and diminish her household. The royal couple's relationship, once hopeful, deteriorated into bitter animosity and open conflict. By the late 1320s, Isabella's situation became untenable. She was sent to her brother, King Charles IV of France, ostensibly to negotiate a peace treaty between England and France concerning the disputed Duchy of Aquitaine. It was in France that Isabella's relationship with Roger Mortimer, a powerful and matic English baron who had been imprisoned by Edward II and later escaped to France, began to take on a romantic and political dimension. Mortimer was a formidable figure, a skilled warrior, and a cunning politician who harbored a deep personal grudge against Edward II and the Despensers. What began as a political alliance between the wronged queen and the exiled baron soon blossomed into a passionate affair. Isabella, seeking revenge for years of humiliation and neglect, found in Mortimer not only a political ally, but a lover who understood her grievances and shared her ambition. Their relationship was an open secret in the French court, a scandal that further tarnished Edward II's reputation and gave ammunition to his enemies. Two became inseparable, planning their strategy to overthrow the Despensers and ultimately Edward II himself. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer, accompanied by a small invasion force that included Isabella's young son, Prince Edward, landed in England. Their arrival triggered a swift and dramatic collapse of Edward II's regime. The English nobility, weary of the king's misrule and resentful of the Despensers, flocked to Isabella's banner. The Despensers were quickly captured and brutally executed, their deaths satisfying the widespread desire for vengeance. Edward II, abandoned by almost everyone, was captured shortly thereafter. The love triangle, by this point, had evolved into a full-blown political coup. Edward II was forced to abdicate in favor of his son, Edward III, a clear breach of traditional succession. Isabella and Mortimer became the de facto rulers of England, governing in the name of the young king. However, the exact circumstances of Edward II's death remain a subject of historical debate. While officially attributed to natural causes, chroniclers and later historians have widely speculated that he was murdered on Mortimer's orders in Berkeley Castle in September 1327 in a particularly gruesome manner, designed to leave no visible marks. This act, whether fact or persistent rumor, casts a dark shadow over the triumphal return of Isabella and Mortimer. Their rule, however, was short-lived. Isabella and Mortimer's grasping for power, their lavish spending, and Mortimer's perceived arrogance alienated the very barons who had supported them. The young King Edward III, chafing under their dominance, and perhaps driven by a desire to avenge his father, staged a coup of his own in 1330. With the support of loyal nobles, he stormed Nottingham Castle, where Isabella and Mortimer were staying. Mortimer was captured, tried for treason, and executed in November 1330. Isabella was stripped of her political power and placed under virtual house arrest for the remainder of her long life, though she was treated with respect by her son. The story of Isabella of France, King Edward II, and Roger Mortimer is a chilling testament to how personal grievances, political ambition, and forbidden love could converge to bring about a violent and unprecedented overthrow of a reigning monarch in medieval England. Number 2. Eleanor of Aquitane. Louis VII, Henry II. Eleanor of Aquitane, a woman of extraordinary influence, intelligence, and beauty, stood at the very heart of European politics in the 12th century. Her story is not merely one of a love triangle, but of a seismic shift in power and allegiance that profoundly shaped the Plantagenet dynasty and the Anglo-French relationship. As the Duchess of Aquitaine, she was one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in Western Europe, controlling vast territories in southwestern France. Her first marriage, in 1137, was to Louis VII, the King of France. This union was a significant political coup, bringing Aquitaine into the French royal domain and greatly expanding the Capetian monarchy's influence. Initially, their marriage seemed promising, marked by their shared participation in the Second Crusade. However, differences in temperament and outlook began to strain their relationship. Louis VII was deeply pious, reserved, and often described as more of a monk than a monarch. Eleanor, in contrast, was vivacious, worldly, and independent, accustomed to the more liberal and culturally rich court of Aquitaine. Chroniclers hinted at growing tensions with Eleanor, reportedly chafing under Louis's perceived dullness and the restrictive atmosphere of the French court. The greatest strain, however, was the absence of a male heir. After 15 years of marriage, Eleanor had only borne Louis's 2 daughters, Marie and Alix. The lack of a son for the French throne became a critical concern, as medieval dynasties depended heavily on male succession. By 1152, the marriage was irrevocably broken. Both Louis and Eleanor sought an annulment, citing consanguinity, blood relation, as the legal grounds, a common loophole for dissolving politically inconvenient marriages. The annulment was granted in March 1152 by a council of bishops, dissolving a marriage that had failed to produce a male heir and had grown increasingly unhappy. This decision freed Eleanor, along with her vast territories, to seek a new partner. Just 2 months later, in May 1152, Eleanor made a choice that would send shockwaves across Europe. She married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. Henry was 11 years her junior, a dynamic, energetic, and ambitious young man. He was also a direct rival to Louis VII, controlling significant lands on France's western border. This rapid marriage was not merely a romantic entanglement, but a calculated political move. For Henry, it brought him the enormous wealth and lands of Aquitaine, making him an even greater power than the King of France himself. For Eleanor, it meant a return to a more dynamic partnership and the opportunity to wield influence in a burgeoning new empire. The consequences of this dramatic shift were immediate and greed. Eleanor's marriage to Henry created the vast Angevin Empire, a sprawling collection of lands that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees, encompassing England, Normandy, Anjou, Maine, Touraine, and now Aquitaine. Henry's holdings in France were far greater than those directly controlled by King Louis VII. This imbalance of power ignited a century of intermittent warfare between England and France, directly contributing to what would later become known as the 100 Years' War. Louis VII felt betrayed and politically outmaneuvered, seeing his former queen marry his most potent rival and bringing her coveted territories with her. Eleanor and Henry's marriage was initially successful. She quickly bore him several children, including 5 sons, 2 of whom would become kings of England, Richard the Lionheart and John. This fulfilled the dynastic imperative that her first marriage had failed to achieve. However, their relationship was not without its own dramatic tensions. As Henry's power grew, so did his infidelities and his increasingly authoritarian rule. Eleanor, a woman who valued independence, eventually found herself at odds with her husband. She famously supported her sons in their rebellions against their father, leading to her own long imprisonment by Henry. The love triangle involving Eleanor, Louis, and Henry was more than a personal drama. It was a pivotal moment in European history. It highlights how royal marriages, even those dissolved, could unleash dueling forces of immense magnitude. Eleanor's choice to marry Henry, a choice made swiftly after her annulment from Louis, transformed the balance of power in Western Europe, shaping kingdoms and defining the course of rivalries for centuries to come. Number 1. Peter Abelard, Heloise, Fulbert. The early 12th century, a time of intellectual ferment and nascent scholasticism, saw the rise of Paris as a center of learning. Among the most brilliant and Medoc figures of this era was Peter Abelard, a philosopher, theologian, and master dialectician. Born in Brittany, Abelard achieved renown for his sharp mind, his ability to debate, and his captivating lectures, which drew students from across Europe to the schools of Notre Dame. He was a man of immense intellectual vanity and ambition, and his radical theological views often put him at odds with the established church. Into Abelard's orbit came Heloise, a young woman of exceptional intellect and beauty. She was the niece of Fulbert, a canon at Notre Dame, who was intensely proud of Heloise's academic brilliance. Heloise was fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, a rare accomplishment for any woman of her time, and was known for her deep philosophical insights. Fulbert, seeking the best education for his beloved niece, invited the celebrated Master Abelard to tutor Heloise in his own home. He likely envisioned a respectful academic relationship that would further Heloise's formidable talents. However, the close proximity of tutor and student combined with their shared intellectual passions and undeniable attraction, soon led to a passionate and illicit love affair. Abelard, in his autobiographical work Historia Calamitatum, The Story of My Misfortunes, later described his overwhelming infatuation with Heloise, admitting that, under the pretext of study, we spent our hours in love. He confessed that he taught less and less, their time consumed by ardent kisses and tender embraces. Heloise, equally smitten, was profoundly devoted to Abelard, recognizing his genius and reciprocating his passion. This was a secret affair, conducted with immense risk in the household of a respected clergyman, in a time when clerical celibacy, though often flouted, was the expected norm, and the consequences of such a discovery could be severe. The affair escalated, and Heloise became pregnant. To conceal the pregnancy and protect Heloise's reputation, Abelard sent her away to his sister's home in Brittany, where she gave birth to a son, whom she named Astrolabe. Upon hearing of the birth, and with the secret now threatening to break into the open, Abelard, concerned for Heloise's safety and their future, proposed a secret marriage. He believed this would legitimize their child and protect Heloise, though it would effectively end his own ecclesiastical career and scholarly ambitions, as married clerics could not hold significant positions in the church. Heloise remarkably resisted this proposal. She argued against the marriage, not out of a lack of love, but because she foresaw the devastating impact it would have on Abelard's brilliant career and reputation. She famously argued that a philosopher should not be burdened by the cares of a household or the distractions of a wife. Despite Heloise's objections, they eventually married in secret. However, the news of their affair and the marriage inevitably reached Fulbert. Canon, feeling profoundly betrayed and publicly shamed by the man he had welcomed into his home and by his own niece, sought a terrible revenge. In a brutal act of retribution, he arranged for thugs to break into Abelard's lodging and castrate him. This horrific act not only ended Abelard's physical capacity for love, but also, in medieval terms, rendered him unfit for many aspects of public life and ecclesiastical service. The aftermath was tragic and endured for both Abelard and Heloise. Abelard, humiliated and physically mutilated, retreated to a monastery. Heloise, though not physically harmed, chose to become a nun at the convent of Argenteuil, fulfilling Abelard's insistence that she dedicate her life to God, a life she entered reluctantly at first but later embraced with profound intellectual and spiritual rigor. Their paths diverged physically, but their intellectual and emotional connection endured through a series of remarkable, deeply personal letters that they exchanged for years. These letters, rediscovered centuries later, offer an intimate and poignant glimpse into their complex relationship, their intellectual arguments, their enduring affection, and their grappling with faith, love, and suffering. The story of Abelard, Heloise, and Fulbert is not merely a tale of forbidden love and cruel revenge, but a profound exploration of intellect, passion, societal expectations, and the enduring human spirit in the face of immense adversity. It remains one of the most famous and tragic love triangles in history, a testament to the powerful and often devastating consequences of intellectual passion, combined with illicit desire in the medieval world.